Hello and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Helen Bennett, LLG's Executive Director of Policy and Governance, and Dennis Hall, LLG's Bulletin Editor.
Hello, everyone.
Now then, last week saw Union Unison raising concerns about proposed local government reforms in England, warning that the replacement of two-tier councils with unitary authorities could lead to job cuts and reduced services. Elsewhere, the Land Registry announced plans to accelerate the local land charges programme, aiming to centralise and standardise data from local authorities. And of course, our very own Rachel McCoy, Director of Law and Governance for the London Boroughs of Newham and Havering, was elected to the local government seat on the Law Society Council. But there was so much more going on as usual. So Dennis, what's first today?
Well, Helen, we take a look this week at the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, which was introduced into Parliament on the 11th of March, with a promise to get Britain building and to tackle the blockers to the development of new building, housing and major infrastructure projects. The bill will have significant implications for local authorities, developers and communities. So, what are the key takeaways for our members? Let's focus today on planning authority decision-making and compulsory purchase. Building on another working paper published in recent months, the bill contains several measures aimed at ensuring local planning authorities deliver a more consistent and predictable regime for developers. And these measures include reforms to the process for setting planning fees, including the power for the Secretary of State to subdelegate the setting of fees or charges to local planning authorities. Next, the introduction of a mandatory training requirement for members of planning committees, and the introduction of a national scheme of delegation, which would, through regulations to be introduced at a later date, set out which planning functions should be delegated to officers and which should go to a planning committee or subcommittee.
Well, yes. And in compulsory purchase, the bill includes several measures aimed at reforming the compulsory purchase process to enable more effective land assembly for public sector-led development schemes. So these include allowing statutory notices related to CPOs to be delivered electronically, simplifying the information required in newspaper notices, increasing delegation of decisions to streamline the CPO process, enabling quicker vesting of land and properties, reforming the loss payments regime to improve efficiency and cost effectiveness, and the bill also extends powers to remove what is known in the trade as hope value in compensation assessments, particularly for compulsory purchase orders related to affordable housing schemes.
Now, all of this could facilitate more accurate compensation claims and support public sector initiatives in delivering housing and regeneration projects. And the bill introduces some of the most significant changes in planning for decades. We will keep you up to date on all of this in the bulletin.
Yes, now, elsewhere, the government has produced guidance on the Online Safety Act 2023, setting out what it does and how it protects people from harmful content online. The Act passed into law on the 26th of October 2023, and work is being carried out to bring its protections into effect as quickly as possible, government says, and Ofcom published an updated roadmap setting out its implementation plans on the 17th of October last year. The illegal content duties are now in effect, and as of the 17th of March, so last week, Ofcom can now enforce against the regime. In scope, service providers must have now completed their assessments of the risk of illegal content appearing on their service. The deadline to do so was the 16th of March. The illegal harms codes of practice were approved by Parliament after being laid on the 16th of December last year. And on the same day in December, Ofcom published its illegal content risk assessment guidance and its policy statement about protecting people from illegal harms online.
In respect of the duties about content harmful to children, Ofcom published its guidance about use of age assurance to prevent children accessing online adult content last January. Platforms that publish their own adult content, known as Part 5 services, must take steps immediately to introduce robust age checks that meet Ofcom's guidance. The corresponding duty in the Act under Section 81 came into force on the 17th of January. Ofcom also published its Children's Access Assessment Guidance so that in-scope service providers must conduct their Children's Access Assessment within 3 months of the publication date, with a deadline of the 16th of April this year. They're required to determine whether their service is likely to be accessed by children. And Ofcom has also published draft codes of practice and guidance about protecting children from harmful content, such as promotion of self-harm or suicide. Now, the consultation on these closed on the 17th of July last year. Platforms will have to risk assess for harms to children from spring this year, and the child safety regime will be fully in effect by the summer of this year.
And just to add, some platforms will have to comply with additional requirements to enhance transparency and accountability. And the Act created categories of service and thresholds for each category, Category 1, 2A and 2B, which were laid via secondary legislation on the 16th of December last year. Once the regulations to set the thresholds have been laid and approved by Parliament, Ofcom will publish a register setting out which services fall into which categories and which will publish further codes of practice for consultation. And Ofcom expects to publish this register in the summer of this year. Now, Dennis, we all have obviously been talking a lot moving forward now about the standards regime since last December. And the Minister has recently been talking about the importance of codes of conduct.
Indeed he has, and Local Government Minister Jim McMahon has said that at the heart of the government's planned reforms to the local government standards regime is the proposal for a mandatory code of conduct. McMahon revealed that there were more than 2,000 submissions to the government's recent consultation on local government standards, which closed on the 26th of February. And he said that the ministry was working at pace to analyse the results. The minister went on, while the standards proposals that the government have been consulting on are for whole system reform, at their foundation is the proposal for a mandatory code of conduct. Government believe that a mandatory code is vital to achieving consistency across all the various types and tiers of local government. And he said, the current regime simply requires all local authorities to adopt a code that is consistent with the Nolan principles. Some take the de minimis approach of simply listing the 7 principles. Others have very detailed local codes. And that lack of consistency, he said, is not helpful to the system overall. It is confusing and means that we cannot have confidence that all are judged to the same standard equally across the system.
No, and he also pointed out that that does not happen in the devolved nations. So Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, they all have mandatory codes of conduct in place based on the Nolan principles, but all of them set out a detailed interpretation of the expected behaviours, he said. And he went on, and I'm going to quote him, he said, there are some members who know what they are doing is not right, and none of this is about free speech, but about abusing the position they hold and their freedoms. And we often see that relationship where elected members who are holding court in the council chamber attack officials on the top table who have no power to respond themselves. And McMahon said, we see that power imbalance is taking place.
Well, indeed, and he said we have examples where councillors can be on police bail for sexual assaults, and during police bail, they can attend council meetings and attend the council premises. That clearly would not be acceptable to most members of the public. But the current regime allows that, and that cannot be allowed to stand, he said. Perhaps more controversially, McMahon said the system should include disqualification in some cases for more serious breaches. On the Nolan principles, which have been in place now for 30 years, the minister said, I have no doubt that the Nolan principles will continue to be enormously influential in contributing to the effectiveness of local government. They are a prescription for the values to foster a culture of integrity and ethical behaviour.
Absolutely, and I suspect really commentators looking at it will think that the one test of time for the Nolan principles is the fact that they have actually got everybody talking. We are talking about Nolan principles, and for that they must be seen as a success, I would submit. And from the feedback we received, it seems there really wasn't a tremendous amount of opposition for a mandatory code. We're all waiting, of course, with bated breath for whatever the government decides on standards. But if I were a betting person, we are certainly looking at mandatory codes and suspension powers, and it seems possibly even disqualification. Now, let's move on. Reported in the Law Gazette, the state of the rule of law in the UK is to come under scrutiny by a high-powered committee of peers with members including a former Lord Chief Justice. This is the House of Lords Constitution Committee, which is inviting written contributions into an inquiry seeking to understand the rule of law as a constitutional principle and what the state of the rule of law is in the UK. Now, the call for evidence is looking into a number of questions. Dennis, you love a list. I'll let you run through the 9 key areas.
Yes, I do. Thank you. Here we go. Number 1, what are the components of the rule of law? 2, how well is the rule of law understood by politicians and the public? And 3, what threatens the effective operation of the rule of law in the UK? 4, what is Parliament's role in upholding the rule of law? Is it performing this role well, and how could it be improved? 5, what is the government's role in upholding the rule of law? Is it performing this role well, and how could it be improved? 6, what is the role of the judiciary in upholding the rule of law? Is it performing this role well, and how could it be improved? 7, is there a role for the public in upholding the rule of law and international influence? 8, how important is the rule of law for the UK's economy? Finally, 9, what threatens the effective operation of the rule of law globally?
It's quite some academic questions there, I would submit. Well,
Indeed.
Lord Strathclyde, he's the chair of the Constitution Committee, and he said, quote, the meaning of the rule of law is being increasingly debated and appears to be becoming more controversial. As a result, for the public and politicians alike, there is less clarity and more confusion about this important constitutional principle. The current government has identified upholding the rule of law as one of its key priorities. The Attorney General has argued that the UK needs to strengthen Parliament's role in upholding the rule of law and promote a rule of law culture. But does this have any real meaning in practice? Recent debates in Parliament have shown that there continues to be disagreement about what the rule of law means and what it encompasses, with some commentators suggesting that the rule of law has either come under threat in the UK or is encouraging greater judicial activism. Now, that's interesting, Dennis. I never thought I'd read the words judicial and activism together. Did you?
Not at all. And well, you know, we've seen it before, haven't we, Helen? Certainly with the prorogation of Parliament under Boris Johnson and the subsequent Supreme Court hearing. And there was lots of noise at that time and since then. High-profile cases have led to some people warning about the undermining of executive authority. This is an important review, Helen, and one to watch.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. And sticking with the rule of law, I understand that lawyers are going to get more direction to enable speaking truth to power.
Well, yes, and of course it's inevitable after the Post Office Horizon inquiry. Whistleblowing and influencing corporate culture will be at the core of an ethical practice framework for in-house lawyers currently being developed by the Law Society. Chancery Lane has been working with the Interdisciplinary Ethics Applied Centre at the University of Leeds to develop the new resource for the 34,500 plus in-house solicitors in England and Wales. The project is part of a 3-year programme that has become increasingly urgent amid the fallout from that Post Office Horizon IT inquiry. The first indications of what the framework will focus on were recently revealed at the Solicitors Regulation Authority's in-house conference. The university's Jim Baxter, the ethics consultancy team leader, told delegates, "You are potentially vulnerable and exposed, making difficult decisions and advising the organization on complex issues, and potentially being the person held to blame when things go wrong." Baxter stressed that the framework is not analogous to regulation. Rather than telling the in-house solicitors what their responsibilities are, we have produced material putting you in a stronger position to meet your professional responsibilities in various ways, he said. The framework will help solicitors achieve independence and influence. On exerting influence, Baxter pointed to the need for in-house lawyers to make a difference in their organisation. They need to be able to help the organisation effectively manage the legal and ethical risks. Without independence, you're not going to be able to provide a voice or challenge or speak truth to power. And he went on, you're not going to be able to help your organisation to effectively manage risk if you're not able to deliver messages which might be less than entirely welcome or inconvenient. And we have produced material, he said, to help you do these things.
Well, the conference heard that the framework will help solicitors develop the right skills and modes of thinking. It will include interactive scenarios to help people exercise legal reasoning skills. And modules will cover ethical decision making and how to influence corporate culture. And there will be elements aimed at strengthening the position of in-house solicitors within the organisation, such as employment contract amendment letters to ensure professional obligations are reflected therein. The framework will also seek to foster professional support and solidarity. Local networks are key because they give people access to informal relationships with other solicitors, Baxter said. If you're facing a difficult situation, what's more useful is the ability to talk to someone who has been in a similar situation and get advice. And of course, we know all about the importance of that at LLG.
Of course we do, indeed. And another element will focus on whistleblowing. And the Leeds team has been working with the whistleblowing charity Protect. Now, the beta mode framework will be unveiled this spring. And of course, we will report further on this.
Yes, and it's all very interesting. Now, I turn to our final item. The independent provider of specialist education advice, ITSE, has warned that resolving the SEND crisis lies in finding a way to ensure that children and young people receive the provision and support the law says they should have, not in changing the law. Now, Helen Hayes MP, who's the chair of the Education Committee, has written to Catherine McKinnell MP, who's the Minister for Schools Standards Department of Education, to update in the inquiry into the SEND crisis. And she outlined that the inquiry had received over 880 submissions of written evidence, clearly reflecting strength of feeling on this issue. Many of those came from individuals navigating the SEND system on behalf of their children, and the effort that's been made by such an unprecedented number to contribute to a parliamentary inquiry reflects the importance of this issue and the huge impact it has on daily lives. Now, Ms. Hayes noted and thanked the department for their submission of a response to the inquiry, but she highlighted that it made no reference to an upcoming white paper or other major policy announcements. And to that end, Ms. Hayes stated that, quote, in light of recent media reports suggesting the imminent publication of a white paper on SEND, we ask you to write to us setting out your plans and the anticipated timescales for any policy announcements on SEND over the next 6 months.
The SEND crisis really is of fundamental concern, Helen, and it seems the whole system is in collapse. It's in the news, actually, everywhere. And according to the website provider, the Special Needs Jungle, families registered 21,106 appeals with the SEND First Tier Tribunal in 2023 to 24 the academic year, 54.53% up on the previous year. That's the largest number of appeals ever recorded in a single year, and the largest increase in any year. It's more than 6 times the number of annual appeals registered when the last SEND reforms were introduced back in 2014. And in its 2024 report, the Ombudsman stated that in the area of special educational needs and disabilities, it finds fault in 92% of cases.
I know, Dennis, staggering. And the Ombudsman has said that a situation where we are upholding nearly 100% of complaints cannot be one that is working for children and their families. And she went on to say that we know that serious difficulties are faced by families and young people with special education needs and disabilities in navigating the system, and that too often they are being failed by it. So let's hope the outcome of this inquiry will improve this area substantially because what matters here, Dennis, are the children. And on that note, that's it for another edition of the podcast. You can read more on that, these items and many more by going to bulletin number 11, available on the LLG website now. I got there in the end. So it's goodbye from me.
And from me too. Bye now.